Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today, the two event recorders that the NTSB secured last night were transported to Washington, D.C., and a preliminary readout was accomplished. The preliminary information, and let me emphasize this is preliminary information, from the event recorders shows that the train was traveling at approximately 82 miles per hour as it went into a 30-mile-an-hour curve. That speed, again, was 82 miles an hour at the entrance to a 30-mile-an-hour curve. Approximately 6 seconds before the rear engine of the train came to a stop, the throttle was reduced to idle. Approximately 5 seconds before the rear engine came to a stop, the brake pressure dropped from 120 psi to 0, resulting in full application of the brakes. At this point in the investigation, we don't know what the initiating event was for either the throttle going to idle or the brake pressure dropping to 0. Our investigators will be carefully reviewing all of the data to determine the functioning of the brakes throughout the trip and to determine why the throttle went to 0, brake pressure went to 0. As you may know, this train made 9 stops prior to derailing. We need to understand how the brake system was working throughout that part of the trip. At this point, we are not aware of any problems or anomalies with the brakes. Also today, we began interviewing the engineer. That interview will be continued over the next couple of days. We have interviews in process with the other three crew members. Investigators from the track group have completed the assessment of the track, have conducted a detailed engineering survey of the site. Earlier this afternoon, we released the track back to Metro North. Investigators completed some of the signals testing. The rest of the signals testing will have to be accomplished tonight, late at night, when the traffic is minimal on the tracks. Earlier this afternoon, MTA provided us with a copy of a surveillance video from a nearby bridge. That surveillance video was of low quality. We've sent it back to Washington, D.C. to our laboratories to see if it can be enhanced. The engineer's cell phone has been recovered, as is part of our routine process, and the forensic evaluation of that cell phone will be provided to the NTSB. Finally, all 7 cars and the locomotive have been re-railed, and our team has conducted the preliminary assessment of 5 of those cars and the locomotive. The 2 remaining cars are in the process of being inspected at this point. As soon as that's completed, all of the cars and the locomotive will be moved to a secure facility for further examination and evaluation in the next few days. Our investigators will continue their on-scene work tomorrow, including interviews, inspections, and documentation gathering. With that, I'd be willing to take a few questions.
Just to be clear, was this human error or was this faulty braking system that led to this derailment?
So the question is, was this human error or faulty equipment? And the answer is, at this point in time, we can't tell. At this point in time, the data is preliminary, but we can say, here's what happened. We know speeds and positions and power settings and brake application. We don't know whether the brakes went to 0 pressure because of a valve change or because of the train breakup. That will be determined, of course, as the investigation continues.
But what does it tell you so far? I mean, when you tell us that the throttle was released to idle at 6 seconds, at 5 seconds, the brake pressure dropped to 0. I mean, in layman's terms, what does that tell us, or what does that tell you?
That says 6 seconds before the engine came to a stop, but when it came to a stop, it had derailed. It had laid over partly on its side. 6 seconds to coming to a stop, the throttle had been at some power setting. So it was only 6 seconds before everything came to a stop that the throttle went to idle.
So this was late in the game?
Very late in the game.
And at 82 miles an hour, that train was going too fast, even for the zone leading up to that curve.
The zone leading up to the curve was a 70-mile-an-hour zone. And yes, it was in excess of that speed.
So I guess the question is, why then was the train going so fast?
That's the question we need to answer. At this point, as I said, this is preliminary data. This is raw data off of the event recorders. So it tells us what happened, doesn't tell us why it happened.
Can you tell us what the locomotive engineer has told you so far?
I can't do that. The interviews have started, but we don't release any of the interview records until all of the interviews have been conducted.
How many seconds going into that curve should the throttle have been pulled? Does the black box reveal the timeline before, the seconds before?
The black box provides quite a bit of data. We will be looking at that data to understand how the train was being managed, how it was accelerating coming up into that curve. But at this point in time, again, this is very early data, basically raw data right off the recorders.
6 seconds before that train stops, the engine stops after it skids. Do you know approximately where that location of that train is 6 seconds before it stops? Where's the locomotive?
The locomotive, and you've probably seen the pictures as much as I have, was basically just nearly inside the turn. So it was not very far through the turn.
Well, how far would it have traveled in 6 seconds at that speed?
I guess what I'm asking is it the throttle come off about the place where it comes off the rails? The locomotive.
That would be close together.
Excuse me?
That would be close together, but I don't, without analyzing it, it's hard to say exactly what that sequence was.
We'll take one more question. Are they toxicology tests done on the driver?
There were drug and alcohol testing that has been completed, but the results have not been made available to us yet.
What does he say?
Remember when?
What does he say?
Yes,
Could you just explain what the brake pressure going to 0 means for the average reader?
Yes.
brake pressure.
And the time of that again, please.
Yeah.
The brake pressure went to 0 5 seconds prior to the stop, to the complete stop of the locomotive.
Mm-hmm.
The brakes are held off by pressure. So at 120 psi, the brakes are held off. When the pressure diminishes, particularly when it goes to 0, full braking application happens.
Do you think that application occurred before the train derailed or after the train derailed?
Don't know that at this point.
So
For the mechanics of this, could you explain to us how it works when the engine's at the back and the engineer might be at, I guess, at the front of the train? How does he operate the train?
Okay, last question.
Okay.
How does he operate the train in a pusher configuration?
Yeah.
The engineer is in the cab car up front.
Okay. And how does it, and what are there lines that run back, or how does it work?
There's controls that run back to the locomotive because all the motive power is at the locomotive. Thank you.